They say family is forever. But what happens when forever starts to feel like a prison you built with your own hands? I gave them everything: my time, my money, my silence. And still, they turned their backs on me. This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of waking up one morning and choosing to matter, even if it means walking away from the ones you love most. I woke up early that morning, just as the sunlight started to slide between the blinds and trace lines across the hardwood floor. There was something steadying about the quiet. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the kitchen clock, the faint creak in my knees as I reached for the coffee tin. I'd spent most of Thursday prepping, scrubbed the stovetop, made the egg casserole the night before, set the table with the blue dishes I only bring out when I want things to feel special. I even laid out a cloth napkin for each place setting, folded corner to corner. The last time we'd all been together under one roof, it ended with a slammed door and the smell of burnt lasagna. But today was supposed to be different. I wanted it to be. By 10:30, everything was warm and waiting. I had the coffee brewing, the cinnamon rolls in the oven, and the vase of cut tulips, yellow and white, right in the middle of the table. My son Mark had called the night before. "Don't fuss, Mom," he said. "Just take it easy." But that's not who I am. Never have been. I like a little order, a little grace. I like things to look like I tried. Donnie arrived first, of course. Always does. Always late. She swept through the door like she owned the air itself, her perfume hitting the hallway before her voice did. "Hope this isn't one of your weird gluten-free mornings," she said, setting her purse down right on my good chair. "I brought a scone from that place in the strip mall. I don't trust your baking ever since that applesauce cake incident." I smiled, just barely. "Good morning to you too." She gave me one of those side hug pats and moved straight for the coffee. "Where's everyone else? Don't tell me we're the first ones here." "We are," I said, pulling the rolls out of the oven. "But they're on their way." When Laura walked in 20 minutes later, she looked tired. Thinner than usual, a little too dressed up for brunch. She gave me a kiss on the cheek and asked if I had any oat milk. I didn't. She made a polite face and settled for black coffee. She sat down at the table without taking off her coat. "I texted Eddie," she said. "Didn't answer." "He said he'd come," I offered, placing forks at each spot. "You know your brother." Donnie rolled her eyes. That man's had commitment issues since the womb. The tension started small. A look here, a sharp tone there. Donnie started in on Mark before he even arrived. "Still mooching off your retirement, huh?" She laughed, loud and forced. "Living the dream must be nice." I told her gently to stop. She shrugged like I was being dramatic. "You don't think it's a little odd, Mom?" she said. "A grown man still coming over here for laundry and leftovers?" "He works hard," I said. "He helps me. A lot more than most." She clicked her tongue. "I'm just saying, maybe he could use a little tough love." Mark walked in 10 minutes later, holding a bouquet he picked up at the farmer's market. "Happy Saturday," he said, placing the flowers next to mine. "Wow, it smells amazing in here." I smiled, feeling that small lift in my chest, the one I only get when he's around. "Sit down, sweetheart. Everything's ready." And for a moment, it almost felt normal. We served ourselves, passed plates, poured juice. But Donnie couldn't help herself. "You still doing that tech thing?" she asked Mark with that tone that suggests disapproval wrapped in curiosity. "It's cybersecurity," he said. "Same contract as last year." Donnie made a show of nodding, then turned to Laura. "Did I tell you what I heard from Craig at the bank? They're hiring again. Good benefits. A place for people who like stability." Mark chuckled, trying to brush it off, but I saw it in his shoulders. That pinch. Then Donnie leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said it. "I just think some people get too comfortable leeching off others. Makes them soft." There was a pause. Mark looked straight at me. Laura stared at her plate. I put down my fork. Donnie, I said slowly. That's enough. She didn't blink. What? I'm just being honest. It's not like I'm wrong. You're being cruel, I said, and you're doing it in my house. That's when she stood up. Actually stood, as if to make herself taller. Maybe if someone had spoken up earlier, your boy wouldn't be pushing 40 and still treating you like a safety net. The room went still. I could feel my own heartbeat, like it was echoing off the walls. Donnie turned to go, but not before throwing one last barb over her shoulder. I'm sorry, but someone needs to say it. This family's a mess, and no one has the guts to fix it. I followed her out to the porch. Not to argue, just to breathe. The morning air was cold and sharp. Across the street, Mr. Harlan was raking leaves, pausing only to glance at the commotion. Donnie was halfway down the driveway when I called out. You didn't have to come, I said. If this is what you think of us, of me, you didn't have to come. She turned, half smiling. I did it for Laura. And maybe so, you'd finally hear the truth. Then she got in her car and drove off. I stood there for a minute. Maybe two. My hands were shaking, but I kept them in my pockets. I heard the door open behind me. Mark stepping out. You okay? He asked. I nodded, barely. Just tired. Back inside, Laura was still sitting at the table, looking everywhere but at me. She's not wrong about everything, she said, barely above a whisper. Sometimes it feels like you let things go too easily. I didn't answer. I just walked over to the sink and started running the water, letting the sound of it fill the silence. Later, after they'd both left, I sat alone in the living room. The tulips had already started to droop. I leaned back in the chair, the one Donnie had claimed earlier, and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't remember the last time my house felt like mine. The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and burned pride. I hadn't slept much, kept replaying Donnie's voice in my head, that smug certainty, like she knew more about my life than I did. Laura's quiet betrayal stung worse, though. There's something especially cutting about silence when you expect someone to speak up for you. I didn't mention any of it to Mark. He texted in the afternoon, just checking in, said he'd drop by later with the girls. I told him not to bother. I needed the day to myself. That was true. But it was also a lie. What I really needed was to not fall apart in front of someone else. On Monday, I went to the post office to mail a birthday card to my friend Doris in Florida. She's 92 and still manages to guilt me if I forget. When I got back to the car, I saw her, Marcy Stenson, the neighborhood's unofficial news anchor, fumbling with her keys 2 spots over. Big day Saturday, huh? She said, smiling like we'd just shared a secret. You must be so excited for Laura. I blinked. For what? Her smile faltered. Her wedding, dear. Didn't she? She tilted her head like a confused Labrador. Well, I suppose it's not my business. I stood there, frozen. When is it? She looked surprised. This Thursday. At the Greenbrier Arboretum. Lovely place. My daughter's friend is doing the cake. I thanked her, I think. I don't remember driving home. My hands were still shaking when I unlocked the front door. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at nothing until the kettle began to scream on the stove. That night, I tried calling Laura. Straight to voicemail. I left a message. Just one. Calm. Simple. Hi, honey. I heard about the wedding. Just wanted to wish you well. I'm here if you change your mind. She didn't call back. The next day, I tried Edward. It rang twice before he picked up. I hadn't heard his voice in months. It sounded the same. Low, careful, like someone always halfway through an apology. Hey, Ed, I said. You got a minute? Sure, he said, but there was hesitation already in his tone. You going to Laura's wedding? A pause. Yeah. She asked me to walk her down the aisle. She wanted someone neutral. He coughed like he needed to clear away his own guilt. It's small. Just family. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I'm family. Evie. No, it's okay, I said quickly. Thanks for telling me. I'll let you go. I hung up before he could say more. I couldn't bear whatever excuse he was about to offer. I sat on the couch, wrapped myself in Paul's old flannel blanket, and stared at the photo of all of us from Mom's 80th birthday. Me, Ed, Donnie, Laura. Arms linked like we meant it. Wednesday morning, I woke up early and went to Macy's. Told myself I was just picking up socks. Somehow, I left with a navy blue dress. It hugged my waist the way dresses used to before gravity started winning. I didn't even try it on. I just knew. It was the kind of dress you wear when you want to feel like you still have dignity, when you want to look like someone who doesn't wait for permission. I told myself I wasn't going, that it would be pathetic, that showing up uninvited was beneath me, but I still steamed the dress and laid it out that night, just in case. Thursday morning came quiet and bright. The sun hit the porch just right. I stood in the doorway for a long time, keys in one hand, purse in the other. The dress was still on the hanger, watching me like a question I didn't want to answer. That's when Mark called. I almost didn't pick up. Hey, Ma, he said. You okay? I hesitated. Then I told him. There was silence on the line. Then, you want to drive by? Just to see her? We don't have to get out. I smiled. That's sweet, honey. But no, if I have to stand on the sidewalk to be noticed, I'd rather stay home. He didn't push. He never does. Instead, I took out the pie dish and started baking. Apple crumb, Laura's favorite. Old habits die hard. When it came out of the oven, I set it on the counter and stared at it. The crust was golden, the filling bubbling. I let it cool for an hour, then sliced a piece for myself, plated it, sat at the table, and took a bite. It tasted like forgiveness I hadn't given, like warmth I didn't owe. By 6 o'clock, I still hadn't changed out of my slippers. I opened my phone, half hoping for a message. Instead, there was a post from Donnie, a picture of the ceremony, Edward holding Laura's hand. Her caption read, "True love and real family, no drama, no noise." I didn't cry. I took another bite of pie. It was too sweet. I threw the rest in the trash. That night, I barely slept. The wind howled against the siding, and the heater kicked on every 20 minutes, groaning like it resented having to work. I stayed curled on the left side of the bed, Paul's side, because mine felt too empty. The pie tin still sat in the trash can, top crust glazed and shining under the kitchen light I forgot to turn off. I didn't bother getting up to fix it. By morning, my lower back had locked up so tight I couldn't straighten past a hunch. I tried walking it off, making a slow lap around the living room, but when I reached for the coffee filters in the upper cabinet, my legs gave out beneath me. I landed sideways, the tile cold and unkind under my hip. The sound I made wasn't even a scream, just a short, startled "oh," like I'd dropped a spoon. It took a while before I could reach my phone. I dialed 911 with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. The dispatcher was kind. "Stay calm, ma'am. Help is on the way." The paramedics were younger than I expected. The one with freckles called me Miss Evelyn, like I was someone to be respected. They lifted me with practiced gentleness, strapped me to the stretcher, and covered my knees when the wind cut through the doorway. At the hospital, I was wheeled into a hallway lined with gray curtains and murmuring voices. They gave me pain meds that made everything floaty, like my body had become a helium balloon, and I was just tethered to it by habit. Eventually, a nurse, white scrubs, tired eyes, asked for my emergency contact. I gave her Edward's number, because I didn't want to bother Mark with this. He'd just started a new project, and I didn't want him worrying. Besides, Ed was my twin. We'd shared a womb. Surely that counted for something. She dialed right there beside me. Voicemail, she mouthed after the second try. Then, do you have another contact? I gave her Donnie's. God help me. She tried again. This time, someone picked up. I could hear Donnie's voice from the other side of the curtain. Loud, sharp, unmistakable. She's where? What happened? Then, well, I'm kind of in the middle of something. Is this life-threatening? The nurse's face didn't change. Not really. But I saw the way her eyes tightened. No, she said quietly. Not life-threatening. Donnie's voice again. Something about rescheduling and being busy. Then the line went dead. The nurse wrote something in her chart and turned to me with a small clinical smile. We'll keep trying. They didn't. I knew it. She knew it. I spent most of the afternoon on that narrow bed, under a paper-thin blanket that smelled faintly of bleach and cafeteria soup. The painkillers dulled everything, except the ache in my chest. At one point, a social worker came in. Her name was Mia, and she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She flipped through a clipboard and said, "Looks like you'll need a few days of monitored recovery. We typically recommend an in-home aide." I nodded. "But," she added, "your records show you previously designated family members for medical authority, your brother and your sister." My stomach turned. "I don't recall doing that." "It was filed a year ago," she said, not unkindly. "Signed and notarized." I didn't remember signing anything of the sort. But then again, there'd been so many papers after Paul died. Trusts, utilities, the will, endless forms. I must have trusted them. Mia continued, "Unfortunately, we can't assign a Medicare-provided aid without their sign-off unless we override the directive. But that would require a court motion unless they voluntarily relinquish responsibility." I stared at her. "So I'm stuck?" She hesitated. "Not stuck. Just pending." Later I called Mark. I didn't want to, but I did. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom?" "Hi, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I had a bit of a fall." I heard the sharp inhale. "Where are you?" I told him. I tried to make it sound like no big deal. Just a bump, just precaution. I didn't mention Donnie, or Ed, or the papers. "I'm coming," he said. "Right now." I opened my mouth to protest, but he'd already hung up. He showed up an hour later, out of breath, and angry in that quiet, simmering way I recognized. He brought me a sweater, my glasses, and a sandwich from the place on Rose Street I liked. "They didn't even tell me," he muttered, setting my things on the tray table. "How long were you here alone?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The doctor came in later and confirmed what I already knew. Spasms, inflammation, nothing broken. I could go home with supervision. Mark took the discharge papers, signed whatever they gave him, and helped me into my coat. When we reached the parking garage, he stopped by the elevator and looked at me, his jaw tight. "Why do they have control over your medical stuff?" I blinked. "Your sister, Uncle Ed. Why them?" I looked away. It was a mistake. "We're fixing it," he said. "First thing tomorrow." The drive home was quiet. The radio played some smooth jazz station, soft and directionless. I watched the trees blur past and thought about trust. How it thins over time, like a sweater worn too often. Until one day, it's just threadbare and useless. When we got home, Mark helped me inside, got me settled with a blanket and the remote. The girls had left a card on the counter. Inside it said, "We love you, Grandma," in crayon and glitter glue. I pressed it to my chest and let the warmth spread. At least some things were still mine. The next morning, I woke up with a stiffness that reached into my bones, the kind that doesn't come from injury alone but from having been held together by sheer will. My back ached, yes, but it was the kind of pain I could manage. The deeper bruises were in places doctors couldn't scan. Mark came by after dropping the girls off at school. He brought bagels and a manila folder, the kind people carry when they're about to make something official. He set it on the table like it was a loaded weapon. "We're going to the bank today," he said, pouring me coffee. "And then we're calling the lawyer." I didn't argue. I was tired of handing over trust like a paper napkin, tired of nodding and hoping for decency. That morning I let Mark take the lead. At the bank, the woman behind the desk was younger than my teapot. She smiled like she didn't care if I was alive or embalmed. But Mark had come prepared. He asked for records, access logs, joint accounts, recent activity. I expected a few odd charges, maybe a subscription I'd forgotten to cancel. What we found was worse. A savings account I'd opened in the 80s, one I hadn't touched in years, had been quietly drained over the past 12 months. Withdrawals labeled as family expense reimbursement, authorized household disbursement, and one entry, bold as brass, estate prep, legal. "Who authorized these?" I asked. She scrolled through the file. "Looks like Edward. He's listed on the account." I remembered the day I added him. Paul had just passed. I was overwhelmed, lost in a pile of forms and death certificates. Ed had offered to help with emergency access. I hadn't asked what that meant. I'd just signed. Mark didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His jaw was tight, and the muscle in his temple kept twitching. When we got back in the car, he turned off the radio without asking. "This wasn't just carelessness," he said. "This was deliberate." I nodded. "I know." That afternoon, I received a voicemail from Laura. The first in weeks. Her voice was sugary, performative, like she was reading off a note card. "Just checking in. Hope you're healing. Heard about the fall. Call me when you're up for it." I deleted it without saving. But fate has a way of not waiting on voicemail. 2 days later, at the local pharmacy, I ran into her. Literally. I turned the corner into the vitamin aisle, and there she was, comparing labels like the world hadn't cracked open 2 weeks ago. She blinked. "Mom." I didn't say anything. I was afraid my voice would betray me. "You look better," she said, smiling. "I mean, up and about." "I fell," I said simply. "I know. I left a message." "You did," I said, reaching for the glucosamine. There was a silence. She shifted her weight. "Look, I didn't mean for you to find out the way you did. About the wedding. I just didn't want any drama." "You mean me," I said. She exhaled sharply. "You always make things heavier than they are. Donnie said—" I cut her off. "Donnie talks a lot. You used to listen to me. That was before you started treating us like we owed you something." I felt that one like a slap. "I gave you everything," I said, not loudly, but with a weight that landed. "You gave what you wanted to give," she said, her voice cooler now. "That doesn't buy you a front row seat to my life." I didn't respond. I simply turned and walked away. My knees hurt, but I stood tall. At home, I went to the filing cabinet. I pulled out every form, every document, every sheet I'd ever signed without reading. The stack was heavier than I remembered. A record of all the times I chose family over formality, assuming love would be enough. I didn't cry. I made tea, sat at the table, and called the lawyer. Her name was Ms. Aldridge. Sharp voice. No small talk. I liked her immediately. "I want to revoke all medical and financial power of attorney," I said, "and I want to rewrite my will." She didn't blink. "Tell me who gets cut." I gave her 3 names. And then, just to make sure, I gave her one name who would remain. Mark. Later that night, I opened Facebook, not because I wanted to, but because the worst parts of yourself sometimes still want to be seen. Donnie had posted again. A blurry photo from some brunch. She and Laura, glasses clinking. Edward, standing off to the side with his hands in his pockets. The caption read, "Family means never having to explain your piece." I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I closed the app and opened my email. Wrote a short message to Ms. Aldridge confirming everything. Subject line: no more access. Then I made another cup of tea, and this time I drank it. I didn't sleep the night after I sent that email. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. But something inside me kept turning like a key in a stubborn lock. I kept picturing their faces when they found out. Donnie, smug and sharp-tongued. Laura, blinking like she hadn't meant to hurt me, but would do it again if it meant keeping her perfect little image intact. Edward. Well, I didn't know what to expect from him anymore. There's a strange grief in losing someone who still walks around with your face. In the morning, I called the cafe on Spruce Avenue, the one with the ugly blue chairs and the best pecan muffins, and reserved the corner table for 4. I told them I needed privacy. The hostess sounded curious. I didn't explain. Then I made 4 copies of the new documents: the updated will, the revoked powers of attorney, and a short typed note I'd written the night before. It wasn't dramatic, just the truth. A list of the things I remembered doing for them: rides to the ER, babysitting sick kids, co-signing loans, showing up to birthdays no one remembered to invite me to, and a line at the end that said, "From this moment forward, I no longer belong to a family that treats me as disposable." Mark offered to come. I told him no. "This is mine to finish," I said. "You've already done enough." They showed up, all 3 of them. Late, of course. Donnie walked in first, sunglasses still on like she was shielding herself from accountability. Laura trailed behind, wrapped in a beige shawl, like grief might catch her if she didn't stay wrapped up. Edward was last. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. Grayer, smaller. "Evelyn," Donnie said, sliding into the chair across from me. "This little powwow better be worth missing my Pilates." "I won't keep you long," I said, placing the folders on the table. "But you're going to want to read these." They each took a packet. Donnie flipped to the last page first, of course. Laura read slowly, mouth twitching. Edward didn't open his. "What is this?" Laura asked, already knowing. "It's my will, and a revocation of every legal right I ever gave any of you." Donnie laughed. "Well, somebody's been watching a lot of court TV." "I trusted you," I said, not raising my voice. "And you used that trust like a credit card. Maxed it out and tossed it in the drawer." Edward looked at me then, just for a second. "Evie, come on." "No," I said flatly. "You don't get to Evie me. You signed off on my money being moved. You ignored calls from the hospital. You left me on a stretcher with a nurse who had more decency than you." Laura opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "You planned a wedding, got married, and intentionally didn't invite me. You wanted peace? Well, here it is. Permanent. You're out of my affairs, out of my accounts, out of my plans." Donnie smirked. "And Mark gets everything?" "Yes." "And what happens when he dumps you in a nursing home the first chance he gets?" I stood up slowly, making sure my hands were steady on the table. "He won't, because he's never asked for anything. He just shows up. That's what love looks like." Laura whispered, "You're being cruel." I looked her dead in the eye. "Number I'm being done." I left the cafe with the sunlight hitting my back. Didn't look to see if they followed. Didn't need to. Out on the sidewalk, I nearly collided with someone. A small figure with tangled curls and a backpack. "Grandma?" Ellie, my youngest granddaughter, blinked up at me. "What are you doing here?" I felt myself soften. "Just having coffee?" She grinned. "You want to walk me home?" Daddy had to run to the office. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." We walked slowly, her chattering about a school project on rainforests. She held my hand like it was still the safest place in the world. At the front steps, she turned to me. "Are you mad?" I paused. "At who?" "At Aunt Laura. Dad says she was mean." I kneeled, even though my knees protested. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, but I'm not mad anymore. I'm free. She hugged me tight. I love you. And I believed her. For once, that was enough. 2 months later, I was unpacking the last box in my new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom on the quiet side of Boise, Idaho. The sun poured through the wide front window, catching on the glass figurines I hadn't displayed since Paul died. They looked ridiculous on the shelf. Tiny deer, a turtle with a cracked foot, a snow globe from Santa Fe. But for the first time in years, I liked the way they looked, like they belonged, like I did. Mark had helped me move. He rented the U-Haul himself, never complained once about the stairs or the cheap carpet. The girls had drawn little signs for each room: Grandma's library, Grandma's secret snack cabinet, Grandma's thinking chair. The labels made me laugh and cry, often at the same time. My old house in Oregon sold faster than I expected. I didn't even have to negotiate. A young couple bought it. They had a baby on the way and wanted a place with soul. I didn't tell them about the shouting on the porch or the nights I stood at the sink hoping someone would call. They'd find their own memories. That was the point. Every Wednesday, I visited the local library. They had a reading group for retirees, mostly women, mostly nosy, but sharp as tacks, and funny in ways that reminded me of how much of myself I'd put on hold for decades. One of them, Miriam, wore purple every week, said it kept her out of trouble. I started wearing lipstick again. Sundays were for family. Not the kind I was born into, but the kind I chose. Mark, the girls, sometimes their friends. We'd have barbecue on the patio, board games in the living room. One Sunday, Ellie asked if she could stay the night just because. No birthday. No special occasion. I just like your bedtime stories, she said. And that's what family is, isn't it? Not who remembers your birthday, but who shows up on a Tuesday with a smile and a reason to stay. One afternoon in late October, I opened the mailbox and saw it. A pale blue envelope with my name in Donnie's looping cursive. No return address. I stood there on the walkway, heart as steady as a stone. Inside was a single card. Blank, except for one line in her handwriting. You always were dramatic, but I guess you got what you wanted. No apology. No regret. Just another jab in cursive. I walked straight to the garbage can and dropped it in. Didn't even open it all the way. I didn't need to see the rest. I didn't need anything from her. The girls helped me prep for Thanksgiving that week. Ellie set the table while Grace chopped celery with the determination of someone defusing a bomb. Mark basted the turkey like he was performing heart surgery. I made the same cranberry sauce I used to bring to Donnie's every year. This time, no one criticized the texture. After dinner, we sat on the porch, the air crisp and full of wood smoke. The girls leaned against me like they were trying to hold me in place. Maybe I needed that. Grandma, Grace said suddenly, why don't you talk to your sister anymore? I didn't pause. Because not everyone who shares your blood shares your love. Mark looked at me then. You okay? I smiled. Better than I've ever been. Later, after the dishes were done and the girls were playing cards on the rug, Mark found me in the kitchen, wiping down the counters with a dishcloth that still smelled like lemons. You did the right thing, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. We stood there for a while. No rush to move. No need to say more. That night, I sat alone with a cup of tea on the porch. The stars were out, glittering like the rhinestones on Miriam's hat. Somewhere inside, Ellie giggled, and I could hear the shuffle of cards, the clatter of laughter. I looked out at the dark, breathed in the quiet, and whispered, "This is mine." And it was. All of it. Finally.